Why is there no archaeological evidence of the Exodus?
We're dealing with a highly embellished and theologically interpreted myth of origins for a nation.
There is no textual archaeological evidence for it.
These stories are not literally true.
The data do not support the historicity of the Exodus or of the figure of Moses.
There was no slavery in Egypt. There was no Exodus. Well, not in the way the Bible has it.
Yeah, you always hear people saying there's no evidence for the Exodus. There's no evidence the Hebrews were ever there. There's, you know, I don't know how they miss this stuff. You may remember, if you were in our archaeology sessions, that there is evidence that Semitic tribes actually moved at this time to Canaan, or to Egypt from the land of Canaan. This is called the Beni Hasan painting. It was discovered in 1964, not far from Saqqara, Egypt, which is just south of where the Great Pyramids are. And it's in a tomb of a pharaoh or a king who reigned from 1911 BC to 1870 BC. You can see these brightly colored robes. These are Semitic tribes making their way from the land of Canaan, what we now call Israel, to Egypt. And it depicts pastoral, nomadic Semites migrating to Egypt with children and livestock in tow. Elsewhere here in Genesis, it says that the Egyptians considered the shepherds to be lower class. They could never be shepherds. So these people are shepherds bringing livestock into the area, and they're dressed as Semites. They're not dressed as Egyptians. So archaeologists go, yeah, this is a migration of people coming from the land of Canaan to Egypt.
You just mentioned Egypt. Let's go on over to Egypt now. And there's something that's been discovered called the Brooklyn Papyrus. And you're wondering, why is it called the Brooklyn Papyrus? It's from Egypt, and because it's in a museum in Brooklyn. Is that the case? And what is it, Titus?
Yeah, Papyrus Brooklyn, in the Brooklyn Museum. They actually funded some archaeological work, and then they published this particular papyrus. But this is it's a list. So it doesn't sound super exciting. List of a bunch of names. They're servants in Egypt from the 17th century BC, kind of think time of Joseph. But when you look at the names, we see a couple of really interesting and important things. First of all, it shows how these people had their names changed to an Egyptian name, or they were given an Egyptian name, just like Joseph was. But then if we look at the original names, a bunch of them are what we would call Semitic. So this is the greater language family to which Hebrew belongs. About 30 of the 95 names we can see are Semitic. But when we look at those Semitic names, there are 9 that we could call biblical Hebrew names. That's extremely important because this helps to establish that there were Hebrews prior to the Exodus. And that's really one of the main points of evidence that I would say helps us to be able to document, look, there were Hebrews or Israelites in Egypt before the Exodus, just as we get from the book of Exodus.
See, we have a visual representation of the Israelites coming, and then there are names in something called the Brooklyn Papyrus. Does anyone know where the name Shipra, what that connects to? The Hebrew midwives that said, oh, these Hebrews, they give birth too quickly, Pharaoh. We can't kill all the children, all the male children. They've given birth before we ever get there. 𝗧𝗔𝗫 was one of the names. Also Issachar, one of the sons of Jacob. That name is in the Brooklyn Papyrus. It's called Brooklyn Papyrus because it's in Brooklyn, New York. It's
Please send it back. I need it.
It came from here, but it's housed in that museum. So you got the visual depiction of it, as he said, from 1876 BC, and then you've got names written in the Brooklyn Papyrus a little bit later when they're slaves, and so you have connections from Egypt that the Hebrews came here and were enslaved.
We are on the other side of the Valley of the Kings. The kings are buried on the other side of this mountain. On this side are noble people that weren't kings, but were high officials. One high official was Rekhmire, who happened to be second in charge to both 𝗬𝗏𝗡 III, who was the king or the pharaoh that wanted Moses dead, and 𝗥𝗘𝗦𝗢𝗥𝗑 II, his son, who became the pharaoh and was the pharaoh of the Exodus. Inside this tomb we're going to go into, we're going to see evidence of slaves making straw bricks right at the time of the Exodus. Let's take a look. We're in the Rekhmire Tomb, just on the other side of the Valley of the Kings. This is where they buried nobles about the time of the Exodus. In fact, this tomb is thought to have been completed in 1450 BC, 4 years prior to the Exodus. This tomb was for the second in charge of both 𝗬𝗏𝗡 III and 𝗥𝗚𝗦𝗢𝗡 II. 𝗬𝗏𝗡 III is the pharaoh that wanted Moses dead. 𝗥𝗚𝗦𝗢𝗡 II is the pharaoh of the Exodus. And in this tomb, you have Semitic, or at least non-Egyptian slaves making mud bricks right at the time of the Exodus. This tomb has a connection to the Bible, and if you're going to say that the Bible is wrong about these people being enslaved, you also have to say that Egypt is wrong about these people being enslaved. Remember how Pharaoh talked about the fact that he wanted to keep the quota up, even though the Hebrews now were going to have to go out and get their own straw. We're not going to provide the straw. You go find it and then keep making the bricks. Was there a brick-making quota? Well, actually, there's evidence there was. This, called the Louvre leather roll, because it's in the Louvre Museum in Paris, comes from about 1274 BC. And what does this thing say? It shows brick-making quotas in Egypt. In fact, one quota was the fact that they had to make 2,000 bricks per day. That's a lot of bricks, especially when you got to collect the mud, and then you got to collect the straw, you got to put it in the mold, and then you got to set it out to dry in the sun. In fact, if they lacked materials to meet the quota, the slaves would be punished for it. So the quota goes up, or the quota stays the same, but the resources aren't there, they're going to get punished anyway. And of course, this corroborates brick-making process quotas and abuse as described in Exodus. So again, this comes out of Egypt. This is not, you always hear people saying there's no evidence for the Exodus, there's no evidence the Hebrews were ever there, I don't know how they miss this stuff. Now, granted, this is circumstantial. It doesn't directly say these were Hebrew slaves. It doesn't directly say from Egypt these things. But when you put all these pieces together, you go, There's too many coincidences here.
There's also evidence from the Egyptian pantheon of gods that shows that the writers of Exodus knew Egyptian theology. We're gonna go back to plague number 1, but I'm just leading off here with the 10th plague because of the phrase in Exodus 12:12, I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. Let me say this right now up front, that the plagues were not random catastrophes on Pharaoh and his people. The plagues were judgment on all the gods of Egypt, because each one of the plagues appears to be a slam, a judgment on the gods that the Egyptians worshipped. Moses must have known Egyptian culture. How did he even know about all these gods? How? Because he was there. That's why. Basically, this is almost like a playground taunt. My God can beat up your gods.
Something called the Ipuwer Papyrus. And we talked about this a couple of years ago, and we talked about archaeology. I want to revisit it because it's so amazing that I don't think there's any other way you can conclude that they're talking from Egypt about the plagues. Because this Ipuwer Papyrus, there's only one of these manuscripts in existence, and the date range on this is somewhere in the 2nd millennium BC. So this would be anywhere from a 600-year range. Some say as early as 1800 BC, maybe as late as 1200 or 1300 BC. The Exodus, we believe, took place in 1446 BC. This is also called admonitions of an Egyptian sage, meaning there's somebody in Egypt writing this papyrus, and you'll see what it says here in a minute. It lines up almost exactly with the plagues. Moses struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed into blood. The Egyptians dug along the Nile to get drinking water because they could not drink the water of the river. The Ipuwer Papyrus says this: the river is blood, yet men drink of it. One thirsts for water. Also, Exodus says blood will be everywhere in Egypt. Ipuwer Papyrus, pestilence is throughout the land, blood is everywhere, death is not lacking. How about Exodus 9? The hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, and camels, and on your cattle, sheep, and goats. Ipuwer Papyrus, indeed, all animals, their hearts weep. Cattle moan because the state of the land. Exodus 9, a little later, and the hail struck down every plant of the field and broke every tree of the field. Ipuwer Papyrus, lo, trees are felled, branches are stripped. How about Exodus 10? The locust came up over all the land of Egypt and settled on the whole country of Egypt, such a dense swarm of locusts as had never been before, nor never will be again. They covered the face of the whole land so that the land was darkened, and they ate all the plants in the land and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field, through all the land of Egypt. Ipuwer, birds find neither fruits nor herbs. Exodus 12, the people of Israel had also done as Moses told them, for they had asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians so that they had let them have what they asked. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. So the Bible's saying, before they left, these Hebrews said, hey, Egyptians, give us some treasures as a parting gift. We need some treasures. Give us your jewelry. Give us all that stuff. Ipuwer papyrus, what does it say? Gold and lapis lazuli, silver and malachite, carnelian and bronze are fastened on the necks of female slaves. Poor men have become owners of wealth, and he who could not make sandals for himself is now a possessor of riches. Coincidence? Doesn't seem to be, does it? All right, how about Exodus 10 again? So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was pitch darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. Okay, so it's dark, right? Ipuwer papyrus, the land is without light. How about Exodus 10:7? A little earlier, Pharaoh's officials said to him, how long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so that they may worship the Lord, their God. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is ruined? All is ruin indeed that has perished, which yesterday was seen. So Ipuwer laments the utter and sudden destruction of the land. How about 12:30? And Pharaoh rose up in the night, and he and all his servants and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where someone was not dead. Plague of the firstborn. Ipuwer, groaning is throughout the land, mingled with laments. Lo, many dead are buried in the river. The stream is the grave. The tomb became a stream, and he who puts his brother in the ground is everywhere. Indeed, every dead person is a well-born man. Those who were Egyptians have become foreigners and are thrust aside. The children of princes are dashed against walls. Coincidence, right? A archaeologist, Christopher Imes, said this. He sums up the whole thing here in one quote. Researchers simply don't know the original dating for this document. It varies across a span of 6 centuries, and the latter end of the date spectrum may indeed align with the events of the Exodus. And as shown above, both documents complement each other so well. A river that became blood, pestilence, crops, livestock, buildings devastated, fire and darkness, well-born offspring dying, lame duck magicians, slaves pillaging the riches of masters, and a shepherding people whose initial presence in the land culminated in cataclysm. How could this not refer to the same event? How could it not? But there's no evidence for the Exodus. There's none. They keep telling you that. You know what they're doing? These people are allowing their paradigm to do their thinking for them. Oh, this is a closed question. There is no evidence for the Exodus. So no matter what evidence comes before me, I'm going to say there's no evidence for the Exodus. I'm not showing you all of it. These were just 5 or 6 lines of evidence from Egypt. So the Great Sphinx, which comes from about 2500 or so BC, maybe 2600 BC. Think about how old that's 4,600 years old. It's hard to believe, right? In any event, this stela right here was added at sometime in the 1400s BC, about, say, 1100 years later. Again, it's about 12 foot tall. It's right there between the paws of the Sphinx. We think it comes from about 1424 BC. All right? It tells King Thutmose IV, again, not the firstborn son of the Exodus Pharaoh, but another son, on a hunting trip, then resting by the Sphinx and having a vision or a dream. What did this vision or dream tell him? It said that if he cleared the sand from the Sphinx, the throne would be his. The throne would be his if he clears the sand from the Sphinx? Why would he need to do this? Why would he even need to put this inscription up?
Do you see the implication here that the Sphinx itself was built around 2500 BC? That stela, the dream stela, was put in 1424 BC. When was the Exodus? 1446 BC. Who was the Pharaoh? Amenhotep II. Amenhotep II himself was not the firstborn. Somehow he got to the throne. He wasn't the firstborn. So when the 10th plague came in, he didn't die because he was not the firstborn. But he had a son who was the firstborn and vanishes from Egyptian history. We don't know what happened to him. That's why, as Mito just said, the second-born son had to put this stela up in order to give him legitimacy, to make him a legitimate ruler of Egypt. So this is circumstantial evidence that Amenhotep II is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. His firstborn son has been killed in the plague. His secondborn son said, oh, now I have the throne, and I'm going to say that Ra gave me a dream that authenticated my claim to the throne, and that's what that dream stela is saying.
Our friend, the great Joel Kramer, put out this video. And he is an archaeologist. So this video just came up just a couple of days ago. This video, after one day, had 500,000 views. Joel does great work, and he went to Amenhotep II's tomb. In Amenhotep II's tomb, when Leray went in 1898, he went way down into this tomb. He had known it had been looted because a lot of the valuables were gone, but he went down to the sarcophagus, and in the sarcophagus was the mummy of Amenhotep II. And then off in another room was this mummy, known as 𝗤𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 was the first son of Amenhotep II. He was anywhere between 10 and 15 when he died. He also had this lock of hair where they would shave the head of the prince except for one lock of hair and let that lock of hair grow. That would designate that person as the next pharaoh. So if this truly is Amenhotep II's son, why did he die as a young boy? Died in the plague.
The gentleman you see standing next to me in Egypt is our guide, Mito Dito. He's a Christian and he's phenomenal. In this next clip, we're going to be standing in the Egyptian Museum, the old Egyptian Museum, and Mito is explaining to us that the Ark of Anubis, which was built by the Egyptians, appears to have the same design as the Ark of the Covenant. Might this mean that at least the Israelites were influenced not only by instructions from God, but by the Egyptians on how to build their own ark? Check this out.
This one is how we know the design, how we know the size. It had been drawn on the wall of the temple. So we take the same size and the same decoration and the same elements from the wall and we apply it, and when we finish it, it became like that. If you take this one and you apply it of what we know from the book of Exodus, when God is giving Moses the inscription to make what we called it the Ark of the Covenant. Take this one and think of it, you will find it is copy paste. It is going along with what God telling Moses to do. Even it has here holes or rings where they had a beam, put it inside and they could carry it over their shoulder. So it is exactly the Egyptian ark.
Here is the granddaddy of them all. Go to Exodus 3:15. This is Nomads of Yahweh. This is Yahweh's name, the great I am. And it's also put forth as Yahweh. And it's called the Nomads of Yahweh inscription. Sometimes it's called the 𝗧𝗪 of Yahweh name ring. We'll get to that here in a minute. And it was found in 2 Egyptian temples in modern-day Sudan. Soleb, that's a 1400 BC inscription, and Amara West, a 1300 BC inscription. So you've got 2 Yahweh inscriptions in ancient Egypt. We don't have, as far as we know to this point, any Yahweh inscription that early from Israel.
And it's on this pillar right here on the backside. It's right here. I've come a very long way to see this inscription, which from the Egyptian hieroglyphics reads, "Land of the Nomads of Yahweh." It dates to the end of the 15th century BC. It's over 3,400 years old, and that makes it the oldest mention in an inscription of the name of the God of Israel.
So basically, this inscription is saying there were nomads in Egypt who worshiped Yahweh. So this seems to me to be quite stunning evidence that you can respond with when somebody says there's no evidence that the Israelites were even in Egypt. Oh, really? Why are there inscriptions in Egypt? The oldest inscriptions ever that say Yahweh, these people worship Yahweh.